I want to introduce Louise Rauseo and say a little bit more than a sentence about her contributions to this conference and to the CSNSF programs. Louise Rauseo began to travel from Annapolis, Maryland, to El Paso and Juarez, Mexico in 1991. And she moved to live in El Paso and work at the border in about 1990. I moved from D.C. to Houston, Baltimore to Houston in 1991, and Louise Rauseo and I began to collaborate on programs both in Houston and in El Paso and Juarez, which involved very different work. Louise Rauseo's work has been an inspiration to me for years. She has focused on 3 or 4 subjects and continues to develop thinking based in Bowen theory and science about migration at the border, about the impact of relationships on health and on multi-generational relationships and health and functioning. She is also an author and writer and thinker who's very interested in spirituality. And you can find her part 1 of her latest article on mysticism and the qualities of mystics in the current issue of Family Systems Forum. I am pleased to introduce Louise. She is also the person who conceived this conference, the theme, the guest presenters, Dr. Connor as the invited guest scientist. And so I will blame her completely for the rich 2 days of thinking that this meeting has held. And now we get to hear her. Thank you.
I can't remember when I presented here, but it was fairly frequent in one place in Texas or another. And I got to thinking that it was just my life, that's how I lived, that I was moving from one place to another. And then all of a sudden this year, it got difficult. And it's been very hard to get me moving again and really get here. And I'm thinking, I know how to do this. I can get my body there and I can get my brain here most of the time. So anyway, I will take the blame for this day and yesterday. I would be overjoyed to be a part of the blame for those of you who are here and of the speakers. I think it's just been a real rich day for me. Now I have to shift gears to talking about something that I had left behind for a while. And my reason was, I think, just having other things that occupied my mind, and that I would probably be getting back to it someday, and probably in greater depth. Well, all of a sudden, I realized that it's going to require greater depth and greater study because the situation is changing so dramatically. So I'm going to tell you some of the old stuff that I've thought about, and hopefully some of the new stuff will come in. But I found some notes from a couple of times before. But I thought at least there are some people just to quote who've been thinking about this, and found some of you might enjoy this short history of migration, which is by a demographer, Massimo Livi-Bacci from Florence, Italy. There's also a commentary by a Georgetown University professor as well. But it's very understandable, and it looks at sort of the long history. But I love this line. The ability and the tendency to move from place to place is part of human nature and a valuable prerogative for adaptation and bettering the human condition. Well, yes, some of the time, not always. But I thought that, and then I remembered something I had quoted from Bobby Lowe, who has studied other primates. And what her comment is, from an evolutionary perspective, all the meanings of migration reflect ecological influences of better or worse conditions for individual survival and reproduction. So we've all been, somebody had fairly success at getting someplace to be able to reproduce and survive and produce this group of people somehow. But what I'm going to try and do is first to say the situation in the world today, I cannot capture yet in terms of what's happening in migration. It's going to take a lot of time and study. And I will say things that probably a year from now I would take back, but that's where it is today. So and I thought that I was smarter than I thought, that it can promote survival under certain conditions. And we're beginning to see what that is. Obviously, that Darwin had a good look at it, that man spread widely across the face of the earth. Man must have been exposed during his incessant migration to the most diversified conditions. Therefore, it's easy to consider migration as one factor in this long-term human evolution. Just being able to take a breath and consider evolution and consider what migration has added or has provided for us. Grandparents, great-grandparents, all of those. And how many of them traveled to get to where they produced your grandparents, your parents, or whatever. So it's going to be, I think it's just useful for me to keep remembering that this is, while things are changing, that's always true. Let me see if I've got these things going right. Okay. And I think that one of the demographers look at this is looking at how this long history of migration shows this ability as humans. We can move into open space gladly, especially in the times of the families that settled in the farmland in Colorado. They were ready to expand. But we can also take over occupied land from others, which we often do. And in the process, groups have to adapt to a new way of life. And I think that one of the things that has challenged me, and I'm not any expert on population dynamics, but that the changes that are brought about are those require careful thinking and choices. So we have the abilities. We'll see how we do with them. This just kind of tickled me funny. Boy, it's kind of like, well, is that what we're like? All colors moving, and somebody stays put. And this is a quote you've been able to see before these days. Dr. Bowen, man created the environmental crisis by being the kind of creature he is. The environment is part of man. Change will require a change in the basic nature of man. And man's track record for that kind of change has not been good. I don't know. We don't know what he would say today. I think the day has provided wonderful perspectives so that we're not stuck with just one way of thinking about it. But obviously, he was referring to the environmental crisis in this, and we've been having a chance to think about it time and time again during these 2 days. So we'll see what we're up to in terms of managing the change. one of the things that Dr. Levy Bocci says that I think is interesting is that we need to study the human activity that comes from this migration. And one of our great gifts, he comes across that several times, in taking on something like migration, is that we are the thinking animal, hopefully. So he was saying one of the things that's important is to study our human behavior. And then in this migration business to anticipate problem areas and to plan around available human history, which we do have. I don't have it as well as some people, that's for sure. And then I don't know what I had in mind with that last comment. So I would erase it, but I can't. About staying connected. Clearly, I think when people are migrating, that is important. But I have no idea how that got on there, except my brain does it. The short history of migration that Professor Levy Bocci put two items that I think you will know if you are interested in migration at all. In history, we have had these two forces that have contributed to occupation of the earth. The ability to reproduce and grow demographically, and the ability to move from place to place. So you put those together and look what you got. You got a population that keeps growing. What we haven't learned necessarily is how to match what we have in the environment to our population and the needs. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes in the future, because it's more obvious now than, what was it, 10, 20 years ago I started being interested in migration. I'm going to take a little sidestep from this part, because what I meant to say something about, when we moved to El Paso, one of my reasons for being there was to get to know what was this movement across the border that people experienced. My grandparents, great-grandparents came from Germany, and I had their stories about what it was like when they finally moved into and settled and stayed put for a while. And I said, it would be so good to talk to people in the midst of migration while they are new at it, and they may stay or they may not stay. But that was the reason to move to El Paso. And then I had the surprise that I thought I was at home. It's like somebody made me a home in El Paso. And it's high desert, and I was born in the high desert of northern Colorado, and I thought somebody they gave me a home. Well, my husband didn't know that. I had to go home with him in 5 years back to Maryland. But I do think that the chance to be in a place where the majority of people are dealing with migration was my first chance to really talk to a lot of people. What does it mean to be taking a huge step into your future of a lot of unknown? And the people that were responsive to that, some of them studied Bowen theory, some of them got to come to conferences, but they were very interested in the meaning of parts of a family being one place and parts of it being another place. And that's exactly what I was interested in. And the first group of, I had a clinic downtown El Paso, Clinica La Fe. If anybody gets to El Paso, check in Clinica La Fe. And what they were willing to do was to let me work with a social worker in the prenatal clinic. And I got to find out, I had a very small research chart thing that was finding out how much did each of the people that I was interviewing, the pregnant women, know about their parents and grandparents? Did they know where they were born? Did they know their parents? Did they know their work they did? This is grandparents. And so it was like 5 or 6 items. And that was my first kind of introduction to how this group of people that was coming from very close by, they were coming across the bridge from Mexico into the U.S., planning to stay. But I got a good look at how much did they have, how much were they grounded in their own family? It was the simplest thing. Turned out it was fairly accurate. But in terms of reproduction, they laughed, everybody laughed at me. Mexican women reproduce under every circumstance. There are no problems with reproduction. I think it's true. So none of them had problems with reproduction, but it was very clear soon after the baby was born, and maybe it was just grandmother and mother and baby, no husband. The cutoff was that close that he wasn't around, so that we could see. But I really did appreciate the chance for months to spend time with people who were in the midst of migration and ask more questions than I guess they're used to. But it was wonderful. So this is where I just wanted to go back. I hadn't had a chance to tell this group of people how this thing came about. Well, let's see if it's going to. So we're back to, yeah, I'm going the wrong way. Do you like that one? Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, so humans, more so than other animals, bring their brains to deal with the issues here. And one of the things I was aware is that, and before I did much reading, that people were coming either with planned migration, and then suddenly in the world you see a whole lot of unplanned migration. The fleeing danger and destruction. Now what I'm hearing is that where the border used to be a rather orderly situation, people coming over, it was busy. But now people are fleeing, they're coming south, coming from Brazil, but they're fleeing places in Central America. There is more danger that people are coming with and what they're living with in their lives. And so what used to be, the people that I knew that were available, the legal scholars and all the graduate students who were available to help, they're overloaded. They are it's just huge. So what we're seeing in the news, forced migration, fleeing tough situations, sometimes not making it across the water, that's something newer, absolutely different from what I was seeing, but is there now. This gentleman's take on the refugees is really interesting. He had thought, I think, early on that migration is a survival mechanism many, many times. But as of now, it is very clear that in the percentage of people where it is survival. Now, he was talking about the contrast of what the pressure puts on our nations who think that they need to regulate the population coming in and somehow manage the numbers. So that is a new dilemma too. I mean, it's probably always been there, but it is new in in the extent of it. So he would stay with the idea, and I think it's probably pretty accurate, that it is a human prerogative, and we will do it. I do believe. And it's one of the ways that the human has tried to improve life for self and for family. It's not always going to work well. So this is what he was describing as the sides of adaptation. Survival for the migrants, searching for survival, dealing with violence, hunger, starvation, economic improvement, or the potential for improvement. And then the management of these populations, where migrants can conflict with the current needs or wishes of the residents. And that's visible in, if you talk to people living in an area where there's a lot of migration. What I think Bowen offers us, one more time, is the role of stress and anxiety. That if you speak to people in the process of migration, you're going to see plenty of stress and anxiety. And the possibility that the community, the neighbors, there may be more anxiety than anybody expected. So he would be offering, Bowen's thinking would offer us the task of careful thinking in the midst of the anxiety. Noticing how much the anxiety limits our ability to resolve the problems. So, using some of Bowen's work, you get to see in migration emotional systems under stress. I mean, lots of stress, and if people are really smart, they learn how to manage triangles and give people a little relief of the anxiety using intelligent use of triangles. So I'll try not to get tangled into that too much now. Okay. Yeah, this is pretty short, if I find it again. I don't think we're going to find easily the international bodies that will help mediate this conflict. It's possible, and I think we've seen some international efforts to work with refugees and migrants. But the leadership is not embraced universally at all. And I don't think that they would be, I don't know that it'd be interesting to see if I can find anybody where they might have some idea of using triangles. Pat Camella does a good job on that in her thinking about triangles in international situations. But I think it's going to be a real challenge to have a way to address the tension that exists now around the migration. So this is so, to me, this is so new that I want to have a chance to think some more on it. This is a talent, not mine. So this is just a reminder. Several people have presented some of this. How the emotional process in families is useful in looking at larger populations, that with room for both individuality and togetherness at optimal functioning. You have all probably seen so many of these examples now of the conflict that comes with migration when it come as a result of war and famine, and then see the countries that want to block access And some countries, though, are working with world leaders to try and serve broader needs. So the world leadership is going to be interesting to watch, too. It may be another piece of where the challenges are bigger than we've seen before. And we are going to be able to see if and how we're up to it. The thing that this gentleman is recommending, he doesn't know Dr. Bowen, I don't think, is that new possibilities grow from intellectual development. Thoughtful, not just reacting. Reactivity toward the encroachment is based on fear. And his view is that making space in a country is based on understanding. I don't know, I mean, he's watched Italy struggle with these things. So, and to see what would make room for new growth and intellectual exploration. So it's going to be interesting to see if he keeps studying and keeps working on these things. I don't speak Italian, but I would like to talk to him. So anyway, and it would be interesting to have him exposed to Dr. Bowen's work. So thank you very much.